Our moderator for this session is Razeshta Setna, and she will be moderating the session, which will continue for 60 minutes. The last 15 minutes of this session will be reserved for Q&A. So if you have any questions or you need to speak to our panelists, you can do so within those 15 minutes. If you still have any questions or comments to make, you can meet them outside this room once the session ends. I would also like to request all of you to please turn your cell phones off. And with that, I think we will begin this session. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, everybody, this afternoon. We have with us Muniza Shamsi. I think everyone in here knows Muniza Shamsi very well, but a brief introduction nevertheless. Muniza, we know, is a Pakistani writer, critic. She's an editor of various anthologies of Pakistani English literature, including one that is very, very interesting. If you haven't picked it up, do pick it up. I think Oxford will have it downstairs. Liberty will have it downstairs. And The World Changed, Contemporary Stories by Pakistani Women. For that, this anthology received a Forward Bronze Award in the US for its American edition. Why we're here this afternoon is primarily because Muniza will be talking about various literary awards given in the Commonwealth Award as well as the DSC Jaipur Award, for which she was, for which she was also part of the jury. Muniza writes for Dawn Herald Newsline. She's contributed various essays to several academic journals, and her forthcoming anthology titled 50 Shades of Feminism will be launched on Women's Day at the South Bank in London. Unfortunately, Muniza, we all want a copy very soon for that one.
Well, thank you very much for Razeshta. I think it's not my anthology, it's an anthology to which I've contributed, but it's got 50 feminist writers in it, so I was kind of pleased to be a part of it.
But let me mention, I did forget to mention here that you were a jury member for the 2013 DSC Prize for South Asian Literature, which was judged, you gave the prize at Jaipur. We know that Jeet Thayal won it for Narcopolis, and Muniza was part of that as well. And between 2009 and 2011, she served on 2 terms as the regional chairperson of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and we'll talk all about that later. Muniza, it's all yours now.
Well, thank you very much, Razeshta, and thank you all for being here. What I'm actually going to talk about is, I'm going to restrict myself to fiction and to prizes prizes given mostly in Britain and Asia. And I'm going to mention the Pakistani writers that have won these awards, but actually I'm not going to dwell on them because some of them are here and you've heard them. So I will, the books that I pick out will be books that are not necessarily by Pakistanis. I'd like to dedicate this to my aunt, the novelist Tazar Hussein. You can see her picture there. It's her centenary year, and she was well known for her novel Sunlight on a Broken Column, which has also been translated into Urdu by the wonderful Tazar Hussein. It's called Shikasta Satoon Par Dhoop. Now I'd like to actually sort of begin on home ground and tell you we have got about 3 awards locally, Pakistani awards. The Patras Pakhari Award, the Jang UBL Award, and the KLF Non-Fiction Award, which of course we're going to hear about this evening, the winners. These are non-fiction awards, and it's where books in different genres compete with, except for the KLF, which is non-fiction. Books compete with each other for the best English book. I'm going to begin with the Costa Book Award, which was formerly the Whitbread Award, and it's for books published in Britain. And it's a 2-tiered competition given in 5 categories: best novel, best first novel, best children's book, best biography, best poetry. And above that, they choose an overall winner. We're actually lucky to have with us today, okay. Right, well, I'm sorry, slight change. They're keeping up with we had some confusion over the slides, and so. Yes, well, I begin with the Costa Book Awards. We're lucky to have actually with us at the festival Kishwar Desai, whose first novel, Witness the Night, won the 2010 award. And it's a riveting tale which alternates between two narrators. And it unravels a terrible tale of murder and infanticide. This year's overall winner was Hilary Mantel, as you all know. And she made literary history because her novel Bring Up the Bodies was not only the overall 2012 Costa Fiction Award winner, but she won the Man Booker Prize a few weeks earlier, having won the prize before for the prequel to that specific book. The Man Booker Prize was actually named originally the Booker McConnell Prize after its sponsor, and then the sponsors changed. And it's one of Britain's richest literary awards. It's open to fiction by citizens of Britain and the Commonwealth, published in the UK. And the prize was originally established in 1968, but became a very high-profile media event in the 1970s and played an important role in the book trade. So there's a link between prizes, book selling, publishing, and so on. And it's a hugely prestigious award. So far, Mohsin Hamid is the only Pakistani to have been on the Booker shortlist. But the quality of the work in the Booker and the type of novels that you get is usually of such a high standard that these books go on to win hugely prestigious awards. As you can see, Mohsin won a whole lot. And this year's Booker shortlist, you will see books such as Jeet Thal's Narcopolis and The Garden of Evening Mists, which will reappear on other lists. The winner, of course, as I mentioned earlier, was Hilary Mantel for Bring Up the Bodies. This is actually a sequel to her earlier novel, Wolf Hall. And it's a specific period in Tudor history, and it deals with the life of a man called Thomas Cromwell, who every school child knows about in Britain. He usually appears as a kind of, man who came up from nowhere. And the hero of the time is, Thomas More, who's this enlightened man, as he's presented in this wonderful play by Man for All Seasons. I'm talking about Wolf Hall, not Bring Up the Bodies, because that's the book I've read, the first section of the book, and of the trilogy. And what she does is to bring that entire period alive, and she throws a completely new interpretation onto Cromwell himself. And where Thomas More is a kind of different kind of character. And of course, it's people, and there are people like the king, and there's a supercilious French king who thinks, who watches the king's fascination for Anne Boleyn. So the first novel ends with the execution of Thomas More and the appointment of Thomas Cromwell as Chancellor. Cromwell actually was the son of a blacksmith. So you imagine in that time, to be the son of a blacksmith and to rise from that to Lord Chancellor of England, Earl of Essex, self-educated, self-made. So it's a fascinating story. And what she does in Bring Up the Bodies, which I've read about and is supposed to be a more spare novel, is that she shows the romance, or the whole life of Anne Boleyn and her relationship with the king, through the eyes of Cromwell, the king's right-hand man. And it leads up to the execution of Anne Boleyn. I mean, we all know how these stories end, and the trilogy will end with Thomas Cromwell's sad fate also, but we haven't got there yet. Last year's shortlist, Costa shortlist, included The Sense of an Ending by Julian Barnes, which actually won the Booker Prize that year. And I thought it was an absolutely tremendous book. In marked contrast to Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall, it's a tight, spare book, and It has a man thinking back upon, it's a contemplation of memory, about time, about how you remember things and how you get things so terribly wrong sometimes, as this narrator of this story does. And it brings out the 1950s and 60s, those post-war years, as he thinks back so vividly, and particularly the kind of class consciousness and the class, the awareness of class of a man who so feels out of things and who thinks people are saying or acting in a way that actually he gets it wrong, you know. And there's another book that was on that short list, which is I just loved this book. It's The Sisters Brothers. It's a Canadian book, and it was actually competing with another Canadian book, Half-Blood Blues, for a lot of Canadian awards. This is, for someone like me, and actually my husband loved this book also, brought up on Westerns. It's a new kind of book. It's set in the mid-19th century during the gold rush, and is narrated by Eli, the younger of two brothers. They have the surname of sisters, and they're hired killers. And on the one hand, it has these sort of terribly chilling descriptions, I mean, cold-blooded descriptions of how they can, shoot a man dead without batting an eyelid. And on the other hand, the poor chap has got a toothache, and his dentist introduces him to this new implement, a toothbrush. And there's this wonderful passages of this chap's fascination for the toothbrush and the wonders of fresh minty breath and all this kind of thing. So the combination of tension and humor, and it's a beautifully done book. Now, the Man Booker group also introduced a new prize, and it's called the Man Booker International, which is given for a body of work in English or translated into English. And the selection depends on the judging panel and is not by books submitted by publishers, which is the norm. And this year's list included one of the great list of nominees, included Tazar Hussein, who's one of the great writers of contemporary Urdu fiction. And I expect most of you have read him in Urdu anyway, but some of his translations are Basti, Seventh Door and Other Stories, and Chronicle of the Peacock. The Man Group also has another prize, which they're actually withdrawing it from this year, and is going to be known as the Asia Prize. It's the Man Asia Prize. And as you'll see, it has a Pakistani author, Musharraf Ali Farooqi, his rather elegant novel, Between Clay and Dust, about a Tawaif and a Pahlavan. A Tawaif and a Pahlavan coping with changing times after partition. And again, you'll see Narcopolis and the Garden of Evening Mists on it. And but this is for writers only of Asian origin. And you see, so all these prizes, I mean, you get the same books appearing on different shortlists. What is different is the competition and the rules of the prize. Some are defined by region, some are defined by a period, like, some will have books eligible only from January to January of the previous year. Some will have from June of the previous year to the June of the next year. So you get a different balance each time. And this year I was on the jury for the DS Prize for South Asian Literature. This prize was inaugurated in 2010 and is a recognition of the fact that South Asian English fiction has now developed into such a strong genre of its own. The prize is given from writers of any country, as long as it is about South Asia. So you don't have to be a subcontinental in order to win this award. I've actually discussed most of these books threadbare, and I would recommend them all. Wandering Falcons, a wonderful novel about Balochistan. Good Muslim, which is a sequel to The Golden Age, and it's set in Bangladesh after the war, after the 1970 conflict. what I like about it, it moves from the specific to the international, because what it asks is what happens to the dreams and ideals of independence when it's been confronted, or the creation of a country has been created by a terrible brutality. And in that way, it echoes partition, I thought. And the other issue it asks is what happens to a soldier when he sees terrible things? And what happens to women when they suffer? Women are often victims of war. So you've got a man who's fought for his country's independence, and his sister, and they're very passionately involved in that. But he can't cope with the brutality of that he has witnessed, and he becomes extremely religious. She, on the other hand, goes off to the village to help victims. And the interplay between the brother and the sister unable to understand her brother's religious extremism, and the brother rejecting everything that his sister and he were brought up on, all the books, all the literature. And it's really done very well. So I talk about that because I felt it had a kind of echoes in a certain way with a lot of things that we face. Of course, then there was Our Lady of Alice Bhatti by Muhammad Hanif. That was another shortlisted book, a wonderfully witty book, as Hanif's books are, but about Karachi and its violence and its hospitals. The Walls of Delhi by Uday Prakash, translated by Jason Grunbaum, are three stories. It's translated from Hindi, and they're about Delhi life. But Delhi life among the underprivileged. And just to give you a rough idea, one of the stories is about a poor man I think he's cleaning the floor, and his broom knocks against a wall, which is hollow. And when he looks inside, someone stashed his money there, and suddenly this Raja poor man becomes very rich. And then, of course, the authorities get after him, and what happens? And this tale of corruption and aspirations, it's beautifully written, and it's beautifully translated. And then we have River of Smoke by Amitav Ghosh. It's a sequel to his Sea of Poppies, but that is an amazing epic. I mean, it takes you from Mauritius to India to Hong Kong, and it's about the opium trade on which so many, big companies in the imperial world of Britain and so on, and even Bombay were created. And it is about the opium wars, about Britain blockading those Chinese ports in order to sell them, to force opium on the Chinese. Then there's Narcopolis by Jeet Thayil, which is set in the opium dens of modern Bombay. So there's a kind of loose link between that and The River of Smoke. Jeet Thayil is a leading English language poet in India. And this is the novel that won the prize. It's a very original novel. It's got very powerful, very poetic writing. And there's a kind of trick where the opium and the opium smoker are almost one. So the opium pipe is, in a sense, a narrator as much as the man who's smoking the opium. And it moves very skillfully, tells about the underworld of life in the opium dens and the graduation of the opium dens to places where narcotics and, not narcotics, heroin and rather harsh, stronger substances are sold. And within that story, he tells the changing story of Bombay and the kind of brutalization of the community. And it's got a lot about, because it has the dreams of smoke, it also has about people and their dreams and what they seek to escape, and the whole dividing lines between reality and illusion. And one of the central characters, in fact, is a woman called Dimple. As you know, you can see Dimple Kapadia. But she's not a woman at all. She's a transvestite. She's a hijra. And later on, she becomes, she's called Zeenat. So again, two filmy names. So there's a lot about films and movies, and also about religion, and means that people imagine a way of kind of bettering your life. he dedicated this prize, when he won the award in Jaipur, he dedicated the prize to Jamil Ahmed, he said, with whom I have become friends. But actually, you'll be interested to know that Jamil Ahmed was the winner of the Shakti Bhatt Award. And Shakti Bhatt was actually Jeet Thayal's late wife. She was about 26 when she suddenly died, and he named this prize after her. The DSC was awarded to H.M. Naqvi in 2010. That was the first time the prize was given. And last year's winner was Chinaman by Shahan Karunat. I can't pronounce it, but he was Sri Lankan, and he also won the Commonwealth Book Prize. Now, the Commonwealth Book Prize is a renamed prize. It used to be the Common Writers' Prize, and is given now for the best first book. But as in previous years, it's a two-tiered competition. So you have writers from different regions. They divide the Commonwealth into different regions, and you have a winner from each region, and those winners then compete with each other for the overall award. And Shahan Karunal Tilaka, Chinaman, is called, well, the full title is Chinaman, the Legend of Pradeep Matthew. And it is a book about cricket, Chinaman being a cricket term. And it's a story about a cricketer who was supposed to be a great wonder. He's a wondrous bowler. And he's not there in any of the records. And the man who writes the story, the narrator, remembers him with such clarity. And so the whole novel deals with what happened to Pradeep Matthew. And within that, he tells you about the history of cricket and, you know, all the sort of great cricket legends, Richie Benaud and Imran Khan, and specific matches are mentioned. It's a wonderful book. And through the story of this cricketer, you see, because he's half Sinhala and half Tamil, he also tells you about the civil war in Sri Lanka and the conflict and the politics. The Commonwealth Writers' Prize was actually before that, when I was involved with it, it was known as the Commonwealth Writers' Prize. Now it's the Commonwealth Book Prize, and it was for the best book and the best first book. And they had a regional judging where they had the regional chair and two judges who judged it, and then they would have an overall judging where the regional chairs would then choose the winner. The first Pakistani to win this award was Muhammad Hanif for The Case of Exploding Mangoes. And in 2010, the regional judging and the announcement took place in Pakistan for the first time. And our regional winners were Danyal Muinuddin's Other Room and Other Wonders, and Solo by Rana Das Gupta, which went on to win the overall award. It's an extraordinarily original book, actually, because it's life not about India at all, but about Bulgaria. And a 100-year-old Bulgarian man, and its first half is his life, which is very dry and thwarted, it seems. And then the second half is his dreams, and these wonderful, rich dreams. And it asks the question, what is really your life? What is your man's life? Is it his, what others people see, or what he dreams, how he enriches it with his inner life? That's the book, yeah, as Solo. And the next slide, I think, is here we are in the judging panel in Sydney. And that particular year, our regional winners for Europe and Asia, that was the region that I was chairing, were the best book was, the best first book was Sabra Zoo, about the civil war in Beirut. And the best book was 1,000 Autumns of Jacob de Zoet by David Mitchell. And that, again, a bit like Amitabh Ghosh's book is a grand sweep of history, but it's set at a point of time when the Dutch East India Company is collapsing. That's late 18th century, and the British East India Company is forging its way into Japan. And the foreigners are isolated on an island. The Japanese wouldn't let them into the mainland, but they still have contact with Japanese culture. They come into contact with it in different ways. It's a terrific book. We had some really good books on our list that year, actually, including a lovely Australian book, Dead Man's Dance by Kim Scott, an indigenous Australian writer who describes the marginalization of his people by white settlers. The winner was The Memory of Love by Aminata Forna. The author is actually the daughter of an English mother and a Sierra Leone father, and her father, a medical doctor, was a political dissident and was executed for it. So her novel knits together stories of several people set against the backdrop of the civil war in Sierra Leone. And her narrator, a British psychiatrist working there, finds that everyone he meets is so traumatized by the past that when he first meets them, they all say, well, we can't remember. And then he slowly discovers their stories. It's a tremendous book. Both Memory of Love and Room, which were on this Commonwealth Prize shortlist, actually were contenders for the Orange Fiction Prize also, which is given to women writers of any nationality, published in the UK. This year's Orange has withdrawn its funding, and at the moment it's called the Women's Fiction Prize. Here's Aminata Forna again. But the other book that I really liked on that Orangeably Commonwealth Writers shortlist was Room by Emma Donohue, which is a terrific story based, in a sense, on the Joseph Fritzl case. He was the man who locked up his daughter for 24 years and had several children by her. She doesn't do that. I mean, he's not her father, but it's a maniac who's locked up this girl, and she has a child. And the story is narrated through the child. So this room is the entire world this child knows. And his mother is the only sort of real human being he knows. And it's really remarkable the way she uses that child's voice to describe the world. And then when he actually gets to the outside world, he can't even do things that we take so much for granted, like he doesn't know what a staircase is. He's never met another person talking to his mother. He doesn't know what's happening. And I thought it was, I think it's a really extraordinarily good book. The only Pakistani writer, there's Room. The only Pakistani writer to have won this award, not to have won it, to have been shortlisted for this award is Kamla, and that was in 2009 for Burnt Shadows. But this year's Orange winner, I was absolutely riveted by this year's Orange winner, which is the Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. She's a classic scholar, and it took her 10 years to write the novel. It engages with Homer's Iliad, and it tells of the great warrior Achilles through the eyes of his companion and lover Patroclus, who is the narrator of Miller's Train. And it's got beautiful lyrical writing, and the way it recreates their Greek childhood and ancient Greece and their boyhood friendship. Because Achilles is the son of a king, and so is Patroclus, but Patroclus is in exile, and that makes a huge difference in their status and in the eyes of others, but not Achilles. And it goes on to the legendary siege of Troy, where they're both ultimately killed. Now, what fascinated me was that there was another book that I had read before this, and that was Ransom by David Malouf, the Australian writer. And his novel constructs a specific period from the Iliad, and which is also in the Song of Achilles, and that is when Patroclus is killed by Hector, the prince of Troy. And Achilles is so enraged that he takes the body and he drags it round and round the walls of Troy for 3 days in his chariot. And according to the religious of that time, I mean, unless you're properly buried, you won't go to heaven. And so the father of Hector goes and makes this terrible journey to the tent of Achilles to beg his enemy Achilles for his son's body so that he can give him the funeral rites. And so that it is just that specific period of history. And it's beautifully done. The novel was shortlisted, Ransom I mean, for the Dublin Impact Award, which Malouf was the first to win when the award was initiated, which was, I think, in 1992, for Remembering Babylon. The Impact Prize is a very rich prize, possibly one of the richest, because it's for about 100,000 euros. And it's given 4 nominations made by libraries. And the only Pakistani writer actually to have been shortlisted for it so far is Nadeem Aslam for Map of Lost Lovers. So that's my sort of rundown on a few award-winning books, and I think Razeshta will ask me some questions now. Thank you.
Thanks, Muniza. Should we begin by talking a bit about judging panels? And when I mean judging panels, I know we've had this to and fro before, and obviously you can't go into what actually happens on a judging panel. I'm sure there's a lot of argument, dissent, debate, but you've been on a number of them. Let's start with the most recent, like your experience for the DS Jaipur Prize, and what are judges looking for? What are you looking for?
You have to go nearer.
Yeah. What are you looking for when you actually you nominate, you shortlist?
Well, when you actually, in both this and the Commonwealth, it's kind of, that part of it is the same, is when the jury has been established, the person heading the jury, the chair, determines sometimes with the advice of jury, I mean, they generally say, this is what we're looking for. So you look for language, structure, style, originality. Will it stand the test of time? Is it innovative? Within each category, like language, what do you look for in language? You will look for style. You will look for originality. You will, what is it doing? How does its structure work? And so you have these categories, and those are the things that you look for in the books that you choose.
But what about, let's talk a bit about certain years perhaps, or within a time frame when maybe thematic concerns or issues, or perhaps even global politics when it features within literature. Do you talk about that? Does that sort of...
No, if the politics is part of the book, but you don't actually look at it from the point of view of politics. You don't really say, I hate his politics, I don't like his book. You rather look at what he's done with his politics, how he's put it across. I mean, if the politics dominates the book, that the characters are sort of subservient to it, then it's really not a very good novel. A good novel, which is a political novel, must have character, it must have structure, it must have plot. All those things must be there, and
so basically, it's traditional.
And the politics has to be interwoven into it. It can't sit with long sort of passages of polemics, which often happens.
So basically, traditional storytelling still wins the
No, but it's
award,
not traditional.
really.
That's not traditional, because you're looking for innovation. You're looking for new directions in writing. So innovation is something that you really look at. You think, well, this is new. I've not seen this before. So it's not traditional. It's just that it's not the... Politics has to be a part of the novel. It can't stand separate, or it can't stand as something that weighs down the novel and it kind of
But then, of course, having said that, you mentioned earlier that sense of an ending. I mean, there's not no politics there. It doesn't touch on anything. It's just very introspective. It's about memory. So, I mean, that, and it's a very slim book.
No, I don't. You see, I don't entirely. They were talking because I don't actually see politics necessarily in terms of Russia and Afghanistan and which government is in power. And in a way, the way he described that the crisis of class in the post-war England, and of a boy wanting to get ahead and wanting, all his complexes. In a way, that's a kind of a political. To me, that is political.
And also, do you feel that often you use the word innovative, you look for that, you look for creativity, but do you feel often awards perhaps even overlook books like that? I mean, we were discussing earlier that when a book wins an award, sales increase, the publisher gets some sort of, it's sort of all about image building. I mean, if you look at a book like Sabra Zoo, talk a bit about that book.
A book like?
A book like Sabra Zoo.
Yes.
Yeah, that book, that particular writer, he did very well after he won his award. So what do awards do for writers and for their careers as well?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. What?
What do awards do for the career?
What do awards do for the
For writers as well.
Well, I mean, I think for one thing, it's always good to get acknowledged. I mean, that's a basic sense of self. I think that's the most important thing, is to get acknowledged. And then, in terms of in the Western world, especially in Britain and Europe, the increase of prizes, the number of prizes that have come up, has made a huge difference to discussions on the novel. I mean, in the 50s and 60s, they were all sort of muttering about, is the novel dead? And they were really, in those days, they only used to look at Anglo literature as English literature. And because of these prizes, then you started getting submissions from Nigeria, from India, and it brought out the fact that the English novel was coming from all over the world. And Sabra Zoo is not a country that one thinks of as traditionally an English-speaking area. He is Lebanese, living in Britain, but here is an English novel which came from somewhere else. And you've actually now got a lot of Arab writers writing in English, which was I always used to think it was a kind of French-speaking area, but... So,
also, you talked earlier about funding for these awards. You mentioned the Orange Award has lost funding. But where do the funds come for awards like where the DSC Jaipur is concerned? And correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, do the funds come from business houses? In the case of the particular award we'll see being given this evening, how important is that? Because obviously one needs the funding, and if that's not available, where the Man Booker is concerned, the Commonwealth Award is concerned.
I mean, you're talking about the publicity?
Talking about the funding. Where does the money come for the award?
Where does the funding come from? Okay. Well, today's award, I think it's a KLF award, and I haven't actually looked at. Isn't it linked to Coca-Cola today? I mean, all these prizes. I mean, the Costa Awards. Costa is the Costa Coffee, the people who sell the coffee. So you've got these big, DSC is a big firm in India. I don't know what the Man Booker group do, but they are big industries. So a lot of the money comes from industry. In America, I know a lot of it comes from private foundations, where you've got private foundations that give scholarships to universities. Similarly, they have private foundations who give money for literary prizes. So a lot of the funding comes from private donors.
Why in Pakistan? Like this evening we'll see an award being given, and I know it's been given before for non-fiction as well. But you mentioned many of our Pakistani authors. Mohsin Hamid, 2007, he won an award. Mohammad Hanif and of course Jameel Ahmed, Wandering Falcon. But why don't we see such awards instituted here in Pakistan, whether they are public-private partnerships, whether they're just government-sponsored?
No, well, we do. Well, I mean, we had the Well, we had the Jung UBL Award earlier this year. No, last year, May it was. And that was for, I mean, I think it's a tremendously good idea. That was for a book published in Pakistan. And they were in different languages. There was Sindhi, there was Urdu, there was English. And so they did have an award, and it was for the best English book. The problem, of course, is that there's not all that much fiction or poetry being published in Pakistan. So it wasn't spread out specifically for fiction or poetry. It was the best English book. So we do have awards. And we've got the non-fiction award, which is going to be announced today. What we need in Pakistan is a link between the award and you need publicity between the press, you need interviews of the author, you need discussion on the book. Otherwise you just say, there's an award-winning ceremony, and I'm afraid usually there's a VIP, and the VIP gets the headlines and not the author. It should be the other way around, but that's how our culture works. We need to work on that.
So, Munisa, before we open the floor for a few questions, do you want to tell us this coming year, early next year, which books, Pakistani writers, do you see on perhaps award lists?
Oh dear, I wouldn't like to make any predictions like that. I mean,
Which ones are your favorites, or which ones are your favorites?
Well, for the coming year, the coming year lot hasn't really kind of arrived yet. I mean, I've read Mohsin's How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia, which I thought was rather interesting, and I've partly read, almost read most of Nadim's Blind Man's Garden, which I thought was terrific. I haven't actually got around to reading the 2013 books, but we've got a lot of very good writers. I've heard a lot about Shahzad Fatma's book, her first novel. And there's one I've picked up. There's Saad Shafqat's got a crime novel. I haven't read it yet. And I've read Irshad Abdul Qadir's I've just picked up. So there's a lot happening out there. I mean, I can't make predictions for who's going to get, awards or who's going to get, but there seem to be a lot of rather exciting books. And
so we seem to be sort of getting there, because there's always this criticism where Pakistani writers and authors and the entire industry is concerned. Like you mentioned, you need the PR agent, you need more authors to be interviewed, you need book reviews out there in the media. That awareness creation, do you think we're like even halfway there? Or what are our challenges still? What do we need to look into?
You see, in the 60s or 70s, for example, you hadn't a clue. There were no books and authors supplements. There were no reviews the way that you have in Herald, for example, the way you get in Newsline. I mean, now you've got newspapers and prominent periodicals. They're doing reviews. They are doing author interviews, and so that is something very important. It will gather momentum. I mean, I've seen it gather momentum. And what has happened in Pakistani English fiction, it's not just something that's happening because a lot of people seem to think it's because of the politics, and that helped, and it brought international interest into this region. But actually, if you follow the trajectory of Pakistani English literature, it is a literature which is coming into its own, which has become increasingly dynamic. Instead of having one or two odd authors, 10 years apart, you've suddenly got lots of them coming out every year.
Do you want to just read a quick passage from Nadeem Aslam's book before we open the floor for questions?
Yes, well, I'll read the opening passage. He's our keynote speaker. I think it's a tremendous book. I can't make any predictions for it, but and I can't read as well as he does either. But here we are. History is the third parent. As Rohan makes his way through the garden, not long after nightfall, a memory comes to him from his son Gio's childhood, a memory that slows him and eventually brings him to a standstill. Ahead of him, Candles are burning in various places at the house because there is no electricity. Wounds are said to emit light under certain conditions. Touch them, and the brightness will stay on the hands. And as the candles burn, Rohan thinks of each flame as an injury somewhere in his house. One evening, as he was being told a story by Rohan, a troubled expression had appeared on Gio's face. Rohan had stopped speaking and gone up to him and lifted him into his arms, feeling the tremors in the small body. From dusk onwards, the boy tried to reassure himself that he would continue to exist after falling asleep, that he would emerge again into light on the other side. But that evening, it was something else. After a few minutes, he revealed that his distress was caused by the appearance of the villain in the story, as he was being told. Appearance of the villain in the story that he was being told. Rohan had given a small laugh to comfort him and asked, "But have you ever heard a story in which the evil person triumphs in the end?" The boy thought for a while before replying. "No," he said, "but before they lose, they harm the good people. That is what I am afraid of." Then,
Thanks, Munisa. Does anyone have any questions for Munisa?
Among the dogs we saw on the screen, which were your three books that you would like to read again, or would you recommend it to people to enjoy?
well, that's kind of hard because I kind of picked out the ones I rather liked. I haven't read Hilary Mantel's Bring Up the Body, so I want to read that. I loved the David Mitchell's Thousand Autumns of... I loved a lot of them, actually. I loved Room. I mean, I've mentioned that.
Memory of Love?
Memory of Love was very nice. Yeah, that's another lovely book. It's very difficult for me to actually pick out from that. I love Narcopolis. I mean, Jamil Ahmed's Wandering Falcon. There's so many. I think I did pick up the books that I like. So for me to actually sort of pick out a top three is, there's Maps for Lost Lovers. That's another one I liked. I mean, I kind of liked all of them.
Okay, I think. Any more, or are we done?
Another quite mundane question, but is there a book that when you've been judging on a panel, you've either particularly had to fight for and make a case for, and why? Or is there one way that you've actually particularly felt a need to fight against, and why?
No, I'm sorry. Is there a?
Is there a book that when you've been judging, you felt that you particularly needed to make a case for and fight for it, and if so, why? And if not, is there a book that others have made a case for and you felt particularly strongly against and therefore fought against, and why?
Well, that actually I haven't. I actively fought for certain books because I felt they had a. I tend to like epics, you know. I tend to like books that say a lot. So those are the books that I would actively campaign for, and I also like books with a kind of linguistic skill, with a poetic, with a rich imagery. No, I have not actually fought against. I don't actually remember specifically fighting against a book. What happens is that you read all these books and you come up with your short list, and judges all have different shortlists, and then you all sit and you ponder, and then about two of you may have a book which is a favorite and you both want, and then the other judges come into it, and they sort of say, well, no, I agree with this person, or I agree with that person, and sometimes you get a book that you haven't even considered, and someone will say it's rather good, and then you go back to it, and then you think, oh yes, I didn't pick that up. That's why I like judging. That's why what's so great about being in a panel, because everybody else is informed, and sometimes you say, no, I think that's quite a good book, and someone will say, oh really? And so what happens is that when you have two people or two books, as has happened, there's a kind of toss-up. Often it's usually a toss-up between two books. Then there are these terrible pauses. Or what do you think it's doing? And then there's a long pause, and then oh well, let's read an extract from it. So then they'll bring out a book, and then you read extract from one book, then you read the other extract, and then there'll be another impasse, and then you'll think again. And so it kind of carries on. And then often it happens where a person will say, I actually prefer book A, but I'm actually very happy if B wins. That's what, I mean, often you'll find judges make that kind of compromise. I'm very happy if it wins, I really like it, but I prefer this. So it works like that. I don't...
In Salman Rushdie's case,
Huh.
Booker Prize,
Huh.
okay, was shortlisted. If it hadn't won the Booker Prize,
Which, you mean Midnight's Children?
The Midnight Children, I mean, his second book actually. Do you think that makes an impact on the author, and would he be that famous as he is now than it would have been if he hadn't won it?
Well, you see, that's kind of a tricky... he won actually 4 awards that year. It wasn't just... he didn't think that it was going to do anything. I mean, he knew it. He spent 5 years on that book, messing around with language. He wanted to... So it was not something that was a fluke. He wanted to get something that approximated the subcontinental sound. He felt there was a linguistic breakthrough he had to make. And he spent 5 years pounding away at the language and, messing around. And he said, I was sure that at some point something would break. And then he used to use his wife and his agent, I think, as a sounding board. He said, I thought if it sounded right to them, well, maybe it sounded all right. So there was a period of experimentation, and this book comes out, and he and his publisher, who had great faith in him, they didn't really think it would do very well. I mean, I think they published something like 2,500 copies, which is a kind of minimal first novel copy. And this book just took off because it came at a point of time where people realized and understood what he was doing, and it was not just a question of winning a prize. Actually, he had made a major, major breakthrough with language, and that is what the importance and significance of Midnight's Children is. He actually turned the key that opened the lock for lots of subcontinental writers. Otherwise, you were trying to constrict yourself into conventional English, and which had no relevance to the kind of way that people here spoke. So in a way, it was related to the prize, but it was also related to an academic and a literary discourse. So I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't won the prize. It might not have got so much publicity, but I think somebody somewhere would have picked it up.
I think we have one last question.
Just the last question.
Ma'am, we are a nation of 180 million people. Why can't we produce good writers over here? Why there's a dearth of good writers in Pakistan? We have got 180 million people over here in this country.
Is there a dearth of good writers?
Yes, he was asking why do we have a dearth of good writers?
Well, I didn't really think we did. I mean, I thought we had I don't see a dearth. I mean, Sadly, my reading is restricted largely to English, and I read some translations of some Urdu novels, particularly a lot of short stories. And sometimes we're fortunate enough to have good translators of poetry also. And it seems to be a very rich vein of writing. I wouldn't think it was, I mean, the English writing is only the sort of, it's the newest of our literatures, and it's very new and it's very fragile. There are only a few of those writers, but they're growing. But our own literary traditions are very rich, and I would not, and the advantage, of course, that the writer in the other languages, in the vernacular languages, if you want, the English readership was until now, had a very small readership, the English writer. The Urdu writer or the Sindhi writer, he speaks to the, even in a political sense, to the actual people living here in a way that the English does not reach. It only reaches a small audience. And that's why a lot of that writing is very, very radical and very, very powerful, and it reaches lots of people. So I don't see a dearth.
And Munisa, on that note, I think we're being told that we have to end.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here this afternoon.